Hi guys, I'm back with another tutorial, and this time I wanted to show you a way of creating and also animating a neon sign, something that you see in a bar, and using Xpresso and a little bit of coffee scripting we can make the actual animation itself uh, a little bit simpler and not have to worry about keyframing loads of things on and off. And obviously the more textures you have, the more colors, the more complicated it will be. And if we stick to Xpresso, you can actually see it will be a little bit simpler, especially when you start learning how you can adapt this. So let's get onto it. Let's start with what we can do: create our own text to begin with. And something I like to do, if we're creating a sign or something, a lot of typography is actually creating my text in spline form to begin with, rather than MoGraph, MoText, simply because you have a bit more creativity over what you can do, a bit of the kerning. We can make it editable and actually highlight the vertices and start moving things around a bit more so than we can do with MoGraph. A bit like using Illustrator or Vector based piece of software. So let's what can we write? Okay. Ooh. Since I just watched Die Hard, I think that's appropriate. So let's move that to the left. Let's make it a bit smaller, and let's find a decent font. I think the one I used for my example was there you go, rolling pen. There we go. And that looks good. Let's play around with the vertical spacing, bring it up, and like this, as you can see, the top of the K is gonna hit the bottom of the Y before this space decreases. So this is what I mean by playing around with the spline and having a bit more control. What we can do is so to begin with, I'm happy with the rest of that. The rest of that seems fine before we make it editable. So once you're happy with that, we can then press C, make that editable, and just let's highlight the bottom word and bring that up. There we go. And so we can just change things slightly while it's still in spline form, and something we can keep changing until the end. Obviously that will remain in spline form, and if you notice something wrong toward the end of the project, you can still change it. Something that's a bit harder when you're using MoGraph text. This is something I've read somewhere, that I think R15, the next iteration of Cinema 4D, is going to change. It's going to have a lot more options, but until then, um, I'll stick with the spline text. Okay, so what we want to do is try and create, if you look at neon signs, a lot of them, or the majority of them, are tubes. And so we're going to reduce the size of the depth to, let's go to 1, and then using some fillet caps we're going to round off the edges. Let's reduce them to 1 as well, and whack the steps up. Let's reduce the thickness a bit more. Let's go to 1.5. There we go. So little things like this, like the overlapping of the, what's that, the P and the I, you can literally come into the text, the spline, find our overlap, and we can edit it slightly. And that's something that you can go through the whole text and change slightly. So all these little overlaps, the little discretions, you can change. And I'm not going to go through everything at the moment, as this is just an example, but it's something that I would recommend you do. Just go through everything and make sure it's all exactly how you want it. So once we've got our text, what I'm going to do now is just create some kind of icon or shape so we can animate, similar to my example I showed you with the lines. So I'll tell you what, let's make a torus, and there we go. I can never remember which one's which with that. Let's bring it up, reduce the size, and let's slice it, and let's make like kind of Wi-Fi-esque. That could be, that's easy to make, and it will be able to show off the sequencing. Actually, let's get rid of that. Got a better idea. There we go. There we go. Let's have 4. Let's I'm only doing this by eye, fairly quickly. I don't want to mess around. So once you have some kind of logo or something that we can animate, the next thing is let's create a background. Let's create a wall. So if we bring up a pane, let's put that in Z. This is our background. Make that a bit wider, and we're just gonna back that away from it slightly, so there's a gap, so it sits off the wall. And then we're going to create some kind of mounts to mount this against the wall. So I'm going to clean this up a bit. Let's icon, text, light, wall. If I don't do this, I get confused most of the time. So let's create some kind of back mount to mount this onto the wall. And what we're going to do is simply just make like a block. Nothing too fancy. Let's fillet it slightly. That should be right. There you go. And move it as if it was being connected to the wall. So let's shrink that down a bit. Obviously you can be as extreme as you want on the details. I'm not going to go into everything. Obviously things like you can add wires, the little clips to clip them onto the mount, but for this case. I'm just gonna not go into too much detail, just for time reasons really. And then one more for the yay. There we go. And now, actually, let's quickly just move up there and make one for the icon. Rotate that, and then I can actually see that this is off center a bit, but you get the gist of what I'm aiming for. So there we go, we've got our backing as well. Let's group them, mount. So okay, let's move on to the material. So what I'm going to do is make a let's go with a fairly dark color for our mounts, and then for the neon lights, let's begin with a kind of orangey red. Now I did a Google just for some neon lights, and what happens usually, depending on the color, especially like reds, you'll see a blend going from a white to through orange and then to a red on the edges, which we can kind of recreate, turn color off and then put on luminance, and we can recreate that with the Fresnel shader. And what we're going to do is move that in slightly, change that to our outside color, so our red. That's good. And then on the inside, we're going to make an orange, kind of a whitey orange or a light orange. That should be alright. And then right on the inside, let's make a white. And then, so we're going to leave specular on. Let's put glow on, and we're going to reduce this right down to say, let's like a 30, 50, and put random back to 0, and let's say 15 radius. Actually, let's put that up to 25. And in editor or illumination, we're going to tick GI area light, and let's drop that on our, let's go into light and then drop that on our text. Now for this I'm going to use the physical renderer, and just because from what I was doing before, it's actually quite quick and it gets a good result rather than playing with global illumination and ambient occlusion. And since we haven't got back and you can't make it out, but from what I remember, that's quite good. Once we start putting in another light and the wall, the background wall, you'll start seeing exactly how good that is. So now with our icon, let's make another one of these, duplicate that. Let's just name that text, and this matte one, and then we're gonna make these, I think let's make these some blues. Let's go some dark blues, and then that's a bit too purpley. Let's try that, and then let's come up, make it so it's going to be dark and then kind of lighten out into the white. Actually, I might get rid of the white for these one, and then glow we're just using material color. I might change that later, but for now I'm going to leave the settings as is and see how it is. So we've got our first material, Matte 2. Gonna make this. Gonna move it around slightly so it's a bit bluer. And the same with this. Hopefully that's going to be enough of a difference to see. And then the third one, make it even lighter. Let's go there. There. And then one more. And we'll make this as light, like a greeny blue. Oops. Bring that around. So we've got 4 different shades of blue and a bit of a purpley. And what we're going to do is, starting off with the lightest, just use them on our 4 different lines. Now for the wall. I've actually got a brick texture. Something like this, when you're using a close-up, you'll definitely want to use kind of bump maps and normal maps, especially if you, like I say, very close up like this. So I'm just gonna use one I had before. There we go. Let's create a bump. And specular texture and the normal. And yep, that should be it. And then we're going to put that material onto the wall. Now I can see this actually upside down, so I'm just going to, there you go, swap that round. And I think I'm going to make it, actually no, that should be alright. What we're now going to do is put a light into the scene. So we just want a very, very simple area light. I'm just going to drop in one of my pre-made lights, and oops, let's rotate this round. Just going to make it slightly bigger, or point it down a bit, and reduce the intensity to about, let's go about 20. Make it a bit warmer as well, only very slightly. Let's try that. Let's get a camera in there, and let's try rendering that, just to see how our glow and luminance is on the wall. So that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with the glow, the actual the luminance of it, how it lights up the wall. I would make the wall slightly a bit smaller and maybe line up the brackets with the bricks, but I mean, as I say, just as an example, that should be fine. And what we could do is start animating these lights. So I'm going to end there as part 1, and there'll be a part 2 where I'll go through the Xpresso and coffee scripts.